answer them. So let's start with the, if you have your terminology list open, this one, I'll answer questions off of there, and then also from the PDFs of the chapters and stuff. So looking at the short fiction section of the chart, is there anything from the short fiction that you want me to spend a little time going over? I have a cuckoo clock. No, you don't want me to go over any terms from the short fiction?
The second word?
Freytag's pyramid, this one?
Yes. I wasn't sure how to pronounce it, so I was
Yeah. Yeah, so we talked about that in one of the first class periods. I think the second class period, I gave notes on Freytag's pyramid. Remember that on the study guide, you can go right to the video where I originally talked about that in class and went over it with the class. But Freytag's pyramid is the plot structure that you're used to seeing when we talk, well, you know, just kind of like, I didn't know that it was sideways. I don't think I can shift it in this it's an image. So if I knew it was twisted, but it's the you know, little mountain where we talk about exposition, rising action, crisis, climax, falling action, resolution, denouement, all of that stuff. So Freytag, it's just Freytag is the one that came up with that concept. And so, you know, it's plot structure. So for example, on the piece of short fiction that's on your test, you might end up with a question like, all of the following happen in the exposition except. So you would have to know where the exposition is in that piece of short fiction in order to select the right answer. Or the climax in this story occurs when A, B, C, D. So, I mean, we went over this, but basically the exposition is when you have the introduction of characters, setting, the situation, basic conflicts. Rising action is the intensification of those conflicts leading to a crisis, which is the moment of a decision, and the climax is the choice that's made or the definitive shift in the piece of fiction. The falling action are the consequences and the results, and then the resolution is the final message or image or whatever. So when I talked about this in class, I was talking about how we're used to this structure. I mean, they've been telling you about this structure for years, but it's not really representational. I mean, usually the exposition is and the rising action are more than 50% of the piece of fiction. And sometimes the story ends on a climax. You don't get a falling action or a resolution. So, you know, not every story has all these parts, like some don't have a crisis. But what we did was in class that day, I went through the story that we read, Snow, and I gave an example of what was happening in each section of that story so that you could identify, you know, how to figure out where's the falling action and where does the rising action give way to the crisis. Yeah, so that's Freytag's pyramid, that one. Good question. What else? Like if you want to go back and see me do the whole thing, you can go back to the video right here. The videos, in case you haven't been in class lately, the videos here are already queued up to the spot in the class period where I talked about that. So.
Miss, I'm not sure if it's gonna be included on the test or not,
Right.
but something I've always struggled with is like mood and like atmosphere.
Yeah. I think that comes up in the settings section of our reading. So let me open the PDF for that. Or you can go to your book, I guess. Do you have your book handy? I don't know, just since everything's digital, I just thought I would just go 100% digital and put it on here. Right. So mood has to do with they talk about it toward the end here. Yeah. So this is on the last page of that, second to the last page of that PDF in that chapter. And so mood and atmosphere are really pretty similar. So mood has to do with the emotions that are coming off from a story. So atmosphere is kind of like the tone of the space where the story is taking place. And that can shift through the course of a story.
AP.
I'm back. It's okay.
Hello, Miss.
You know the internet. You know how the internet is. Let's hope that doesn't happen again. I was just in the middle of something profound, I'm sure. Okay, so I was talking about atmosphere and mood. So atmosphere has to do with like sort of the feeling that we have when we are reading. So there could be a creepy atmosphere or a comforting atmosphere, that kind of thing. They give the example here in the text of, is everybody here? Oh, let me put the recording back on. Okay, it's recording again. So it talks here about an intense atmosphere if it's nighttime, or there could be a hectic carnival scene and you get anxious, that kind of thing. So mood and atmosphere are kind of interchangeable. Mood is usually, if you have to distinguish between the two of them, and I did not ask this question on the test, but I'll just tell you, mood is something that we usually assume is focused on the reader. So the writer creates an atmosphere, and the mood is what the reader feels when they experience that atmosphere in their reading. If that makes sense. Bring my chat box back up here. Oh, I lost all the chats, but I think I had read them all. It will save them in at the end. Hopefully that makes sense. Just remember, author, atmosphere. The author, the A, creates the atmosphere, right? And if you remember that, then you can remember that mood is the one that the reader feels as a result. So think about a movie, right? You go in and the people making the movie made it suspenseful on purpose, and scared is what you feel. That's the mood. Okay, good. What else? We're just on short fiction. Those of you that are just joining us or coming back from my little internet drop. Do you want to switch over to the terminology? Would that be easier, maybe? So if you look on the terminology list, all of the terms, there are 150 some terms because they're stage directions. Not all of these are on the test, as I mentioned on Tuesday and last week, but there's a good representation of them, because if I put all of these on the test, you wouldn't be able to finish it in a reasonable amount of time. So you need to finish the test in one sitting. It's not going to let you come back to it if you have to leave. So make sure that you've got time to sit down and do it. So let's look at the fiction terms. Are there any terms on here that you want me to spend some time talking about? Maybe that's easier than the chart. You can write it in the chat or you can unmute. Everybody's good with the fiction stuff? I know some of you that are in this study session weren't in class on Tuesday. This study session is not me going over everything. This study session is for you to ask questions. So as long as there are questions, I'll keep, responding, but I'm not gonna go through a semester's worth of material. Yeah. All right, do you want to move on to poetry then? Is that what you're telling me? I think that's what you're telling me.
What's an unreliable narrator?
Okay, so the unreliable narrator, that part comes out with point of view. That's in the point of view chapter. So I'm going to open that one up here. So unreliable narrators are narrators that you can't completely trust because they're not objective. A third person narrator is more reliable, usually, because they're what we call objective. They're just describing what they're seeing or what is in the view of the narrator. And so we take that with, you know, kind of 98% accuracy because somebody's just reporting it. A first person narrator is always what we call unreliable because a first person narrator can only tell you stuff from their perspective. And maybe their perspective is limited and they don't know the whole story, they don't know the whole picture, they don't know the other side of things. Or maybe they have a bias and that bias interrupts the idea that they're presenting information. They might not be trying to deceive us as readers, but they're just limited in their scope because, you know, if I'm in a classroom and something happens, I only saw what I saw and I can only interpret it the way that I interpret it, but somebody sitting across the room might have seen additional information. So an unreliable narrator is a narrator that we can't completely trust what they say 100%. I think a good example of an unreliable narrator is in the Yellow Wallpaper, right? Because we have that that character who is, you know, mentally unstable. And at first we take her word for everything because we're used to kind of accepting what narrators tell us. But then as the story progresses, we realize that she's being treated for, you know, some sort of depression, and she's slowly going crazy as she sees this lady in the wallpaper and she starts tearing it off and so on. So at a certain point, whatever she says, we can't really take 100% truthfully. She's not trying to deceive us, it's just that her perspective is limited. There are other narrators, depending on, you know, the piece, that on purpose are trying to deceive us as readers. So an unreliable narrator is any one of those types where we just can't believe 100% of what they say. All right, you can kind of scroll through the terminology here and just see if there's anything that, you know, if you need to distinguish between things, or if you want to ask how something might show up on the test, you know, how's that going to be tested? You can do that too. So last call for short fiction terms. Well, it's not really last call because probably at the end I'll say something like, okay, any other any other terms you want me to go over? Okay. Then if you joined kind of late, we were talking about the test at the beginning in general. So the terminology will show up in matching, in multiple choice, and also in the multiple choice about the new passages that you'll read on the test. So there might be a question about, you know, here, read this passage, what type of narrator is present in this passage? Is it a first person narrator? Is it a third person narrator, third person omniscient, third person limited omniscient, third person objective? You know, choose which type of narrator is present in this story. And it'll be a new piece. It's not going to be something that we've already read. All right, well, then let's move on to poetry. At the end, I'll come back and go over anything else that, you know, that strikes you. So there will also be a new poem on the test, and you'll have to read it, answer some questions about it using terminology, and also it will be sort of testing your interpretation level too. The poem will not be too difficult to access. I'm not going to pick something from the 14th century or anything like that. But, and if there's vocabulary issues, then I will put it at the bottom. Like I'll make a little footnote explaining what that is so that it's easy for you to read. So are there any terms or concepts with poetry that you want me to spend time going over? Which ones do you want me to talk about? None? Why are you all here if you're not going to ask questions about the material?
They're asking questions in the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh, I just saw okay, I'll move it over. All right, so form. When we're talking about form in poetry, we just mean like the structure, right? So is it taking on a specific closed form where there are rules about how many lines and how many syllables and how it needs to rhyme in what order? And those types are down here, generally in this section called Recognizing Kinds of Poetry. So, you know, odes, ballads, and then down here under form, there are some too, like Vianelle, Sestina, you know, all these different forms. These are generally closed forms. And so what are the rules? I might, if there's a poem on the test, I might ask you, what form does this poem take? A, is it a Vianelle? B, Sestina? C, Petrarchan sonnet? D, free verse, you know, like that. Or these terms could be in the matching where you have to match to the definition. Terza rima, okay, terza rima comes up in form. So let's go back to that PDF and I'll show you. So this whole chapter was on form. So form's kind of like the general term. Terza rima is at the end because they talk about first closed form, the sonnet, where's terza rima? It's on page 817 here at the top. So terza rima is a specific type of rhyme scheme. So there will be a pattern with end rhyme. So there are hundreds of them, but the ones that they talk about in this text, I think there's maybe 4 or 5 that they mention. So terza rima has this particular rhyme scheme. They're rhymed in groups of 3. So that terza is like for 3, like a tercet. So A, B, A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, E, D. It just keeps going in an interlocking fashion like that. And you can notice it because whatever is the middle item is the outside item in the next stanza. So if the first stanza rhymes, you know, head, boy, dead, then the next stanza would start with toy and then something else and then, you know, like koi, so that all the B's rhyme together. They put it horizontally here, but in a poem it would be vertical, right? So terza rima is just like a type of rhyme pattern. Let me give you some examples here of which ones to look at. We read this poem. Acquainted with the Night was one of our assignments, so. Okay. Anything else from poetry? I mean, obviously that poem is not the one that's going to be on the test. I will tell you that most of the figures of speech and things like that are questions that come up with the poem that you have to analyze. I did not put those in general in the matching. It's just an easy thing to define. By now, everybody knows what a metaphor is. So it's not really in the matching, like, tell me the definition of a metaphor. Instead, there'll be a question, you know, the metaphor on line 7 of this poem suggests A, this answer, B, that answer. So you have to go to that line and figure out what that metaphor is. So I would say the things that are in figures of speech here are more application type questions than they are definitions.
So are the types of forms more of the matchy than the application?
Well, the way that I did the forms on the test is generally with the new poem that's on the test. So I might, you read the poem and I'll ask you, is this an example of A, VNL, B, Sestina, C, terza rima, that kind of thing. So if you don't know what those things are, you're just going to have to guess. But if you can eliminate some, then you might be able to make an educated guess. But hopefully you know the difference between them, because those are wildly different things. Like
Can
the
you
sonnet.
explain? Can you explain 90 and 91?
90 and 91 of VNL. Okay, so let's go back to the form thing because they have examples and stuff on here. So a VNL is a poem that has a repeated stanza. This is going to be in the closed form section. I'm trying to see where they have it in this text. Okay, that's the beginning. All right, so VNL has a certain stanza pattern and certain lines are repeated throughout the poem. And let me see where they have their example of that in here. Common measure, it's after sonnet maybe. Maybe I don't have all the pages on here. Common measure, yes. It's open form. Maybe it's in this section on recognizing kinds of poems. No, that's just different formats. All right, well, I'll just tell you then. So a sestina is a poem that has a certain line that's repeated about 4 times through the course of the poem in certain spots. So it has to rhyme in a certain pattern, and then it has to have this repeated line throughout. And that line is usually the, like an important element of the concept that's being presented in the poem. And then what's the other one? Sestina. So a sestina is a poem that relies, instead of on a rhyme scheme, on a repetition of words. So a sestina has a structure where there are 7 words. So each stanza has 7 lines, and there are 7 words that are different on the end of the line, right? Just like if you were writing poetry, there'd be 7 different words. Then those words, those same words, show up at the end of all the lines in a certain order. So you'll know that it's a sestina because the same 7 words on the end of the lines, the first stanza, are repeated on all the other lines. Like all the other lines have to end in those 7 words in a rotation. And then the last 3 lines use all 7 of them within those 3 lines. So some of them are embedded in the lines and some of them are on the end.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just can't locate I don't know why that's not in the form section. I might have to go back and figure that out for you. Any others?
What is imagism?
Right, so imagism is a type of poem. It's like I'm looking for where it is on here. It's toward the end, isn't it? Yeah, 97. So imagism is a poetic movement. So it's not a device and it's not a type of poem. It's more of a poetic philosophy. Imagism is about poets wanting to create like a snapshot moment. They're usually very short poems, just a few lines. And the idea is that the poet is trying to just give you one image and that's it. Like if you opened a door and you saw something and then the door closed. And it's a movement from, you know, the late 19th century where people were writing like that. So, I mean, you can understand if it's a snapshot moment, it's not going to be a very long poem. Anybody else? Make sure it's still recording. I'm paranoid that it turned off when I look. It's recording. Okay. All right. Do you want to move on to drama then, or? Okay. I saw one yes. So moving forward, drama terms. So there are some terms that came from the introduction that I wanted to talk about before we started Oedipus Rex, because I knew that you were going to encounter those as you started reading. And I wanted to do a little slideshow on those. So there's a slideshow with those terms, and you can access the slideshow here if you need to review it. You can go through it and all the terms are in that section. But are there any that you want me to talk about here? Okay, then I asked you to read the section on tragedy and comedy and defining drama. I just combined those two because they continue one right after the other in terms of the page numbers up here. So you can ask me to define something. You can ask me how might that show up on the test. You can ask me what's the difference between this one and that one.
How is it going to show up on the test?
Well, which one?
Whoever was talking, you can go first.
Okay, yeah, I think they got overlapped.
I was gonna ask the same thing, like how like you're gonna ask like the drama questions, like yeah.
Right. Well, there's not going to be a piece of drama on the test because that I tried to really make it so that it was doable within 2 hours. I'm not going to make you read a play on the test. So most of these that are on the test, like I said, don't expect for every term on this list to be on the test. There's just no way you'd be able to complete the test in a reasonable amount of time. So the ones that are on here are in the matching section, because you can't apply them to the poem and you can't apply them to this piece of short fiction. And it's just not fair to also make you read a play on the test. It's just poems and short stories are more portable. So these are just going to be straight up definitions or examples. The matching is about examples or definitions. By the way, on the matching, sometimes there are extra answer choices. Just be prepared for that. So there might be 15 terms, but 17 answer choices. So you need to know which ones to leave out on the matching. Okay, oh, got real quiet. I would know the difference between dialogue, monologue, soliloquy, and aside. That's kind of important to know. Stage directions, you know, I would say probably half of these terms that are here on the drama section are on the test. Okay, anything else? Like I've been expecting as we've been reading these through the semester that you're making notes and learning the terminology. So if there's a lot of things on this list that are unfamiliar to you, then, you know, we've been working with them. So if you've been taking notes and coming to class where I talk about all these different things, I've talked about all these things in class, then, you know, you just need to review. If you haven't been diligent with that, then you know, you do have tools, You can go back and look at them. All of these that are linked here are all to the class periods, to the exact moment where I was talking about those items in class. So you can go back and hear me talk about them if you want. If there's like if you know that there's some that you were present for and you've got in your notes, but there's some that kind of skipped your attention, you might want to go back and review those or ask me about them now, but it doesn't seem like people want to ask me. I made it really clear that this was going to be a Q&A. So. All right, well, any questions from any of the other sections or the terminology list? Or if you came in later, I was answering questions at the beginning about the way the test will be set up, or questions about what you're going to encounter on the test, how things will be
So,
asked.
I was gonna say, you said that we can take it at any time of the day, but we just have 2 hours to take it, right?
Right, so when you start, it will give you 2 hours to finish. So if you move away from it, then your clock is just ticking, and it will like turn off and won't accept any more answers after your 2-hour time span is up. You might not need 2 hours. I mean, for the people who've been consistently coming to class doing their notes, or if you've been watching the videos, like some people, they just can't come to class at the time that it is. Some people have emailed me saying, well, I have to help my little sister with her, she's in 3rd grade and I have to help her with her stuff during the day. So I watch the videos later in the day. I can't come to the actual class period. So that's why I've been recording every single class period. So the people who've been keeping up with the classes and the readings and all of that stuff probably just need to brush up, refresh their memory, look at some examples, and you're going to be fine in 2 hours. The people who haven't will probably, struggle a little bit to finish in 2 hours or to finish effectively. And I feel like that's what an exam should be, right? Like a cumulative exam should be checking to see, do you have the knowledge and skills that were expected in this course? And either you do or you don't at this point. But yeah, you can start it at any point in the day. Like if you want to just get it over with first thing in the morning, then just sign on at 8 and do your test. You'll be done in 2 hours. If you need more study time, I mean, I don't know what your class schedule looks like tomorrow, what classes you have to attend and what ones you don't. Use your time the way you wanted. That's why I opened it for all day, so that you could have an opportunity to pick your best time.
Can you see what time we take it at?
I don't know. Why would that matter?
Oh, because like, what if like someone takes it at like 8 p.m. and then you're like, oh, they put it off like until the
Oh no, I
the
wouldn't
end of
think
the
that.
day?
Nah,
I
she's gonna
mean,
take it with her friends.
if I didn't want to, well, there's different versions of the test. So. If I was worried about that, then I would just say you have to do it between, like during our class time. And that would be it. So I'm not gonna think that. I'm gonna think, especially in this circumstance, there's people who are working. There are people who, have other obligations, and, maybe you have other classes and other things that are due. So every decision that I've made for this course has been to try to give you the best possible advantage. So no, I don't know if I can see the time, and I wouldn't think that even if I could. I've got other things to do that I'm not tracking down who took the test when. I'm just going to be grading the written portion and, trying to get my grades done for Monday for you. Because I have all those research papers to read on Saturday. Does anybody want to talk about the research paper? Or because there's some people in here that I don't see regularly in class. So I'm just thinking maybe there might be some questions. We can spend time talking about that if you don't want to talk about the test.
Wait, Miss, I have a question. I was just looking at my notes and I don't have a definition for farce. I don't know what that means.
Oh, okay. Farce is in the drama section, and it's going to be here in tragedy and comedy. I don't know if I already opened that PDF or not. I don't think I did. My glasses back on. A farce is a type of comedy. So this one is broken up into tragedy. And if we scroll to where the comedy is, it talks about different types of comedy. A farce is kind of like a slapstick performance that's meant to be funny. And by slapstick, we mean usually physical comedy. It's sort of like, you know, hilarious. It's meant to bring out those kinds of humor vibes. And they talk about it when they're talking about old comedy and new comedy. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's right here. So this is on page 1046. They talk about farce while they're talking about satire. So it's defined right here. You know, you've got these clowns and like, you know what's a farce is the Three Stooges. There's no political commentary. They're just hitting each other in the head with a board and people are laughing, right? So it's just horseplay and joking. Sometimes it's sexual, you know, in a joking way, that kind of thing. So in the textbook, they talk about how old comedy relied on those sorts of things. Satire and farce and so on. They make a distinction in this chapter between old comedy and new comedy. Hopefully that helps. Let me see if there's anything in the chat. Okay, do you want to go through your list and see if there are any lingering terms? You know, let me scroll through the list or, you know, go through the chart. We've been almost an hour, but. All right, well, let's call it quits for the review then. And not as many questions as I expected, but maybe that's a good sign. Maybe that means everybody's ready to go tomorrow. If you have questions about the research paper, you can stick around. I'm going to turn off the recording and you can stick around and I'll answer questions about the research paper if you like. I sent out a little post this morning or early this afternoon about some things that I'm noticing in some of the drafts that people have been sending me to look over, just in case it helps you. I'll do that some more through the week if anything else comes up, but just to give you a little tip because we're not meeting in class, you know, every single day. So, all right, I guess that's it for review then. Do study. I've given you a good idea of what to expect tomorrow. And, you know, if you know your stuff, I think you'll be fine. All right, so that's it for review. If you want to stick around and talk about research paper, then feel free.